Don's going to take us through a fascinating, really fascinating presentation about talking about flavour and how to communicate flavour and reveal the secrets within Canadian whisky, which for me is going to be the next big thing in the world. You know, Canada's been a sleeping giant for too long, and I really genuinely think it is waking up and realising, thanks to the work that Don is doing, the world is waking up to the range of flavours and the quality of whiskies which exist within the warehouses and distilleries in Canada. So, Don, over to you.
Thank you, Dave. So I'm Don Livermore. I had the privilege to be on stage with Dave at Tales of a Cocktail last year, just about this time, introducing the flavor wheel. A little bit about myself. I've been in the industry for 22 years now. I started out as a microbiologist within our distillery. That's my passion, yeast. Here's the topic of yeast again. The company's been fantastic to me. I got an opportunity to go to school where I did my Master's of Science in Brewing and Distilling at Heriot-Watt, and in 2012 I finished my PhD in Brewing and Distilling, working around wood and infrared sensors, which might be of interest to your question, which I will certainly try to answer around what machinery may do. But our biggest partner in the world is the LCBO, that's the Liquor Control Board of Ontario. We've recently, in the last 3 years, released some whiskeys, which is rare for Canada, as a rare cask release. And they approached me the first year, and they said, Don, can you make the Canadian whiskey flavor wheel? And I said, okay, well, there's lots of flavor wheels people have developed out there, but there's not one for Canada. So I sat down, pen and paper, and this is what I came up with in about a day. It took marketing 9 months to make it look pretty. But my thing is, I took a little bit of a different approach, and I'll talk to it as we go along the presentation here. But from a big picture point of view here, I looked at it that flavor only comes from 3 places. Really only comes from 3 places, and we can manipulate those places, and it certainly starts in the center of that wheel, where you start with the yeast, the grain, and the wood. And then you see the second tier of the wheel that you go out there. Those are the things that we use within our distillery or within our maturation warehouse, or the types of grains that we use. And then third ring is your traditional flavor, what you would see in a flavor wheel, your flavor descriptors. That's what your sommeliers, a lot of the wheels that are out there. But for me, and what I've been finding over the last year when I've been going to whiskey competitions, it's the outside ring of that wheel that really where people are very curious are. People want to be educated more, and those are the chemical compounds that causes those flavors. So it's really dovetailing into what Ian was kind of mentioning first of all. So here's our distillery here. This is the Hiram Walker Distillery, founded in 1858. In front of us there is the Detroit River. Right across my office every day, I see the city of Detroit. So we are the most southerly point in Canada. Today, our distillery will produce about 50 million liters of absolute alcohol in a year. And it's pretty much running, we run about 10 days, and then we take every other weekend off. That's kind of where we're at the moment. So with that, the first thing of our operation is our grain. I know we certainly love to throw out there from a marketing point of view, yes, we get all local grain, and certainly we would certainly claim that fact as well. Really it is for about costs. Southern Ontario, it is a big corn belt, so we do get in grain, and we get in corn, certainly into one of our 19 silos that we have here. In a year, we're about 100 metric tons of grain a year, and it's mostly, for the most part, that corn does come into our facility. The thing is with corn, we have a young lady that works in her name is Christy, and when she evaluates and looks at corn, she'll do this chemical analysis up here, so look at the test weight, the heat damage, kernels, broken material, that sort of thing. But that's all nice. Christy's most important job is this. She physically picks up that grain, puts it in her hand, puts it and smells it. What she's looking for is a compound called geosmin, and you'll see that on my flavor wheel under the green section there. You see spoilage. What geosmin smells like is an old book, a root cellar, beets, dirt. That's a sign of grain that's been naturally spoiled. So if you see any whiskeys out there with that musty character, that's a sign that the grain has certainly come in. That compound will survive fermentation, distillation, and aging, and I would have to deal with it 18 years later as a blend. And if you have a privilege to see our distillery, Christy keeps a drawer full of the grains here, and this is what I rejected this week, and it hits you like a ton of bricks. Don't worry, the field ethanol plant up the road will take the grain. Your car doesn't care about musty smelling alcohol, and certainly we're in the field ethanol area of Ontario. The other thing is we've learned our lessons in the past as well, and I don't know if you can see it on these clear pictures here. We do take a hydraulic probe and core the entire sample of the grains. Farmers can be a tricky bunch, as we know. What they could do is they can layer the nice core grain on the bottom. We want to make sure the good quality grain is certainly laced through the entire round of the truck. Okay? The other thing is, for us in Canadian whiskey, it's rye. Rye is our DNA, it's the flavor to Canadian whiskey, similar to the blended scotches. It was barley, and to Jameson, I know Brian talked about this morning, barley has been key to their paths, certainly. For us, it's rye. Rye, we don't necessarily get close to our distillery. We do get it on the north shore of Lake Erie, if you know the geography of southern Ontario. That is sandy soil. That's where a big region of Canada where that's the major crop. Although this is coming to Canada very shortly in about 2 weeks. But it's tobacco. Tobacco grows in the sandy soil region. But when a tobacco farmer harvests tobacco, when the field is blanketed, it's very windy where we are because of the Great Lakes. They want to prevent soil erosion. And the grain that really grows in poor conditions is rye. Rye will grow in sandy soil, rocky soil, swampy soil. In fact, it won't grow past 25 degrees Celsius. That's why it is indigenous to Canadian whiskey, and that's why we've chosen to use that. With Canadian whiskey, we are the opposite of bourbon, although we don't have to be, but generally, us as Canadian whiskey producers, we're the opposite. We ferment corn separately, we ferment rye separately, we ferment wheat separately, we ferment barley separately, we distill it separately, we age it separately, and we put it together at the end. That's why they have a job like mine as a master blender. So, looking at the flavor wheel here, if I want a sweet, soft, creamy perception to my whiskey, corn is used in the blend. If I want a nutty character, barley, we certainly would recognize that in this part of the world, barley will be used. Rye is that spicy characteristic in the grain, and wheat gives you a nice bready character. I often will call it a Tim Hortons character. If anybody's from Canada, they'll know what Tim Hortons is, but it's that Timbits, we call it, the little donut, and that's what wheat will certainly provide to your whiskey. One of the things is, I'm going to move on to this slide here for a second. Why rye? Why do we want to use rye? It's a big question, and certainly it was because of the fault of what's happened in Canada, but there is a scientific reason why rye is chosen, certainly as our whiskey. If you actually look at the grain rye, here it is here, we really do want to focus on the fiber part, or the shell part of that grain. And if you could actually, if this had some little more clarity here, what the fiber is actually made up of: cellulose, hemicellulose, and lignin. Cellulose is the long chain sugars. They're all attached together. They're about 10,000 molecular weight in size. So they kind of rope around each other. That's the green and black up there. And what lignin is, it kind of ties it all together. That's the red part you see up on the slide up there. The other analogy I really would point to people is a brick wall. Cellulose and hemicellulose are the bricks. Lignin's the glue. Okay, so we've kind of established that's what we're looking at here. If you look at all the different grains here, corn, rye, wheat, or barley, rye has the highest level of lignin. Okay? Rye has the highest level of lignin, far more so than all the other small grains. Why is that important? Well, there's lignin here. Okay, big molecule. You can kind of get the sense of big building blocks. What's your distillery like in the summertime? Pretty hot. You're cooking, you're heating, you're distilling. So what essentially happens is you're busting apart the lignin. It gets into these little building blocks here. And one of the things I would say to people is this: what drives me crazy is, Don, how much rye is in your whiskey? You should not be asking me how much rye is in my whiskey. You should be asking me how much 4-ethyl glycol. Because really that is the spice to the whiskey, and that gives you the nice spicy sweet smoke. Rye has a lot of lignin. Rye has a lot of these spices to it. I often will say, I think Dave heard me say this at Tales of the Cocktail last year, I think lignan's the world's most unappreciated molecule. If you really think about peat, what you guys are doing with Scotch, what's peat? It's plant material, right? Plant material that's been degraded and broken down, eventually gets smoked into your whiskey. And that's the same building blocks you see here. Lignin is the world's most unappreciated molecule. I want a t-shirt that says that for some reason. So with that, when we make Canadian whiskey, I'm going to back up a slide and I'll come back again. We do cook it. Here's our hammer mill here. Similar to the Europe guys' processes. We'll put the grain flour in there. We add malt. In Canada, we can add enzymes to it, and we do. We certainly are allowed to add enzymes to our process if we want. Our water does come from the Great Lakes because that's where we're located. We do some sour mashing with our whiskeys as well in Canada, so we'll take the back set, put it back into the start because we want to drive that pH low. And the real reason why we want to drive that pH low is we add nitrogen. Nitrogen is the yeast limiting for growth. For me, in Canada, we have nice pristine lawns at home. How we make our lawn grow faster is we add fertilizer to it. This is the fertilizer to yeast. We do mix it cold. You don't mix it up warm, obviously. You're going to have tackiness to it. And I love this slide here. Here's starch under a microscope. It just pops open once you hit a certain temperature. And I heard you say yesterday, you recognize corn gives you a different, which hybrid you did. We do see that with the different small grains as well. You see it pop open. And at that point, the enzymes can certainly start taking effect. We'll pass these two slides here. We then get into fermentation, one of my favorite certainly topics. We got 39 fermenters that are 190,000 liters in capacity. With this slide here, you would certainly see here's our corn mash here, here's our rye mash. The point is we separate the grains. One of the things that we have really strived at is certainly, we talked about yield this morning in Brian's presentation. For us, when I started the distillery in 1996, I arrived with 9% alcohol fermenters in our corn. Today, we've brushed up to 17%. It's all how you feed your yeast if you want to drive up your fermentation. I said the analogy to somebody earlier this week. It's like a birthday cake. If I gave you a birthday cake at the start of the week, would you eat it all at one time? Somebody said yes. My belly would be full. No, you maybe take a piece a day. That's how yeast will operate as well. You want to increase your alcoholic concentrations, you feed the nitrogen, and you only do it during the log. Here's it really geeking out here. You only do it through the log phase as well. You stop after that point. Okay? Our rye, we really don't play around with. We get to about 8 or 9% alcohol is what we do there, and it takes about 2.5 to 3 days. The thing is, when we talk about flavor, is I'll often say to audiences in whiskey tastings, what does yeast make? Every time there's, it makes alcohol, it makes carbon dioxide. Yeah, but don't forget this. And we are brewers first and foremost, right? And here's a good way to put it if you ever do whiskey fests or talking to audiences like this. Yeast does this. Yeast makes green grass, fruity, floral, sulfur, fruity, floral, green grass, soapy, sulfur. Those are the 5 major flavor compounds that yeast does make. We as brewers can influence yeast on making those compounds. There's a lot going on in the slide up here, and I was certainly more than welcome to share the slide with you. But we can change nitrogen levels, we can change pH levels, we can change oxygen levels, and we can create, if you look on here, all those flavor compounds the yeast will make. Right? I can always tell when a brewery starts to cheat a little bit and they're running out of operations, and you can start seeing how to increase throughput. One of the things they would like to do is increase the temperature. Yeast will start making more sulfur. And you can start seeing and recognizing it in their beer. That's a little tidbit, but that's what we can do. We are brewers, and I often will say fermentation. I know this isn't the thing you wanted to say to your consumers, but it's the heartbeat of the operation. And I think you touched on it, Ian. I don't know where you're sitting here, but you touched on it. Fermentation has to go right, where everything else goes wrong. It's the heartbeat of what we do as producers. Distillation, I think we're all familiar with distillation, but I'll maybe make it into a little bit of an easier effect. For us, everything goes through a beer still first. And we, as you would look at the bourbon facility, you see a big column stills here. They're made entirely of copper. This rye still we have here is 65 feet tall. It's got about 55 trays in it. And beer stills, really what they do is they concentrate flavor. One pass through a beer still what happens is this. You put it through the top, goes down the bottom, you add the steam, and you create a temperature gradient. So 78 degrees Celsius is boiling point of water, or alcohol, 100 is water, so all the alcohol vapor goes up the top. We get it to 70% alcohol. But you can forget all that. Really what happens is this, one pass through a beer still, you keep the grain flavor you're using, you keep the fruity, floral, green grass, soapy notes the yeast is made. The key is copper, right? And this picture up here is supposed to be a nice copper shiny tray. It's a white salt residue. Copper salts out sulfur. And we know that. But we love to put it on our whiskey bottles for marketing perspectives. Copper distilled, copper pot distilled, copper, because copper is a sexy word. We all use copper. I like to dispel the myth of marketing whenever I can. That's why we just do that. For us, we can put that spirit through the beer still into a barrel if we so choose, which is a heavy rye whiskey. Or what else we can do is we can run it through a distillation column again, and that's your rectifying and extraction column. And we can get up to about 94.5% alcohol. Like I said before, what drives me nuts is this. I can make it from corn, wheat, rye, or barley, and you cannot tell the difference. There's a brand I compete against in Western Canada. On their label, they'll say 100% rye, because rye is the touch point right now in marketing. You can pick it up. I don't taste any rye in it. But they're right. They're right. Us as producers should say, well, how did you distill it? Distilling shapes your whiskey. And I put that up here. We are brewers as well as distillers. Okay? There's one last way we certainly distill at our facility as well, is that's the pot distillation. This is a copper still, which we have insulated here, and this is a pot still. So I mentioned every one of our spirit will go through a column still first. We then take the second step and put it into a pot still. Pot stills are very simple. Very simple run. Many of us in the audience will run pot stills. And what I would say is this, and here's the money slide here. When asked, and I put this slide together just out of a textbook, is when you slowly boil it, the first stuff that comes off is the green grass flavors of yeast domain. That's your acetaldehyde, methanol, acetal. I put acetal up there. That comes off first. That's the heads. We actually cut that, we throw it away. And it comes out in this order. It really does. Ethyl acetate, and you got furfuryls, amyl alcohols. That's your cherry, wine, banana, strawberry, apples, apricots. As you get going here, then your phenylethyl alcohol comes out, your floral notes, and then your spicy notes coming from your rye. Right? What's left in the bottom of the pot after 12 hours distillation is the soapy characters the yeast has made. That comes from the yeast cell wall. That's the cutting point. Unless you want a soapiness into your whiskey. That's the heads and tails cutting. And this is what you see on this flavor wheel here. That's all on the outside of the ring. Actually, when I was doing this presentation a few times since Tails, Dave, I actually want to do a Whiskey Wheel 2.0. I actually would love to put the boiling point of all these chemicals on the outside to prove distillation shapes your whiskey. Distillation shapes your whiskey. And we as craftsmen, certainly, this is what we certainly want to try to do. It's not a pure cut point. They do mix in and out with each other, but that's essentially the order it comes out in. So, if I was to do a tasting, this is lot 40. I wanted to do one here today. Lot 40, and I think there's still the bottle remaining back in the kitchen where we came in here, is our 100% rye whiskey. Okay? I find whiskeys that had a lot of rye content will give you that warm feeling through the chest. The more rye I blend into your whiskey, the more the warm feeling goes through your chest. That's that 4-ethyl guaiacol. We like to call that in Canada the Canadian hug. Okay? This one has a beautiful length of finish, and I think the added thing with this brand here is we do that added pot distillation step, which removes those characters and concentrates up those flavors of rye. What I will propose to is next, and I think this is the next evolution of this. We've all seen this, right? Spider diagrams. We have whiskey, people come to the store or to Whiskey Fest doing these little diagrams. I don't care for them. I really don't. It looks like a constellation, right? The stars. I think what the beautiful part about this whiskey wheel is this is called a polar histogram. I could take this up here, imagine this is the center of this wheel, right? I then can draw a bar graph, and I can tell you what your whiskey is going to taste like. And the things with Lot 40, because it's 100% rye, you can certainly see coming out this axis, there's no other things that are occurring in it. We do age it in brand new barrels, so you will get certainly that influence. And because of our pot distillations, you're going to get that coming out of your axis. And that's an interesting way to evaluate whiskey. It's a histogram, but in a circle. And I think this matches to what we do, and this is what makes this most practical. I've done this for every one of our components, so I know what our whiskey's going to taste like even before I put it together, which is very, very cool to do. The second thing in our type of things as well is wood. Wood is very important, as we certainly talked about here. We use mostly American oak in our facility. We have European oak. I always like this slide here because it shows you how you cut the wood between each different species of it. But oak in itself is the same thing as the fiber shell of the rhizome, right? Remember I was talking about fiber? Oak is the same thing. Cellulose, hemicellulose, and lignin, and it is 100%. There's a lot of fiber going on there. And we essentially want to do the same thing as we did with rye. We got these big molecules, you want to break it apart. And what's the best way to break apart wood? Don't say it. Chopping seems like a lot of effort. Fire, right? Fire. You're burning. You want to break it apart, right? You want to break it apart. So this, when I was doing my PhD, when I was working on it, my thesis was this, is I wanted to measure the quality of a cask. So what I was able to do is take an infrared sensor, butt it against the wood of a barrel. Within 30 seconds, I know how much of these wood compounds will certainly come out in your whiskey. So there you go. There is technology out there that can rapidly tell you how much wood will give to your whiskey. And I can only do it from a lab scale. I need to partner with somebody from a fiber optics company to be able to do it from a practical scale. But here's lignin. Lignin, big molecule, you burn it into these building blocks. You don't have to remember all that, but lignin, that's where your clove, and that's where your, certainly your vanilla comes there. You get some smoky notes, sweet vanilla, roasted peanut, that sort of thing, that comes out. Okay? I view wood as you know the game Jenga? Those are the building blocks. You're trying to pull out the building blocks the best you could. Lignin's the world's most unappreciated molecule. There you go, I said it 4 times on the camera now. Cellulose, hemicellulose, you break it down. Here it is here. That's where caramel toffee notes come from. Okay? If I was to break apart a barrel, is more fire good, more fire bad? Depends, yes. Yeah, I always get that. I was looking at you because depends, and in this audience I would expect to say that answer. When I did my PhD, I thought, more fire is good. If anyone knows the show Tim the Toolman Taylor, more fire good. I actually thought you would get more vanilla caramel toffee on that. Here's my next slide here. So this is your wood extracts, which Ian had kind of talked about. Those are your vanilla caramel toffee notes. This is 3 years of aging. And what this is here is, I'm going to first show this part. This is how fast your wood compounds come out. This is actually called diffusion here. Molecules want to go to equilibrium by nature, and it happens very fast. If anybody does any barrel finishing, really 200 days is all you need to get most of it out. Okay? This is a 2 millimeter depth of burn. That's a 4 millimeter depth of burn. I didn't try 1, 3, 5, or 7. But in the case here, I repeated this over and over again. Inevitably, every time the 2 millimeter would give me more vanilla caramel toffee notes than the 4 millimeter. I kind of misled you on this slide, the previous one. I should have one more arrow, because it's the black stuff. It's pure carbon. And I know a lot of producers will want to buy the 4 millimeter depth of char, and the reason for that is it'll help pull out sulfur notes, whatever got missed in the distillation step. That would be a reason why you'd want a thicker layer of char. Okay? The other thing I want to put on here, here's a once-used bourbon barrel. New barrels will give you 4 to 5 times the amount of vanilla caramel toffee notes than a once-used bourbon barrel. And then here's a barrel that's been used over and over and over again that I can use, and I have the philosophy, I'm probably the odd man out as a master blender in the world. We keep using the casks till they fall apart. Because ethanol is a good solvent. It keeps picking away, keeps picking away, keeps picking away, keeps picking away. If you ever have a saw, which I did on I was cutting the inside of barrels, it's very soft on the inside surface, but on the outside it's very hard. Envision that Jenga tower. Just keeps picking away. This part of the curve you'll see is the same for everything. That's called ethanol lysis. That's where alcohol is lysing or cutting away the wood until it falls apart. So that's how I will design my recipes based around that sort of activity. And you can certainly see on the whiskey wheel the cask. These are all the chemical compounds. If I was to redo this again, I'd split it between lignin and cellulose. Certainly that to be the case. The last thing I'll talk about, because it is on the wheel, I'm not showing any whiskeys here today, is the barrel finishing part of the whiskey wheel. Remember where I called about diffusion? We can finish in port, sherry, rum barrels, that sort of thing. Let's say this was a rum, the green dots on the inside of the wall of the barrel, the blue is the whiskey here. Again, that's where I say molecules by nature want to come to equilibrium. I know we call it finishing, the real science word is diffusion. We won't live as human beings unless diffusion occurs. Okay. Last thing, and Ian kind of set it up in the last segment here, is location. And I sat there thinking, man, that's almost very similar to us, but our temperature is just a little bit different. In southern Ontario, where we're located, it gets very hot in the summertime. It doesn't get to 42 degrees Celsius, although it was when I left. It turned to be 40 degrees Celsius when I left. It's very hot in the summertime and humid. There have been times I've come back from Tales of the Cocktail in the Detroit, Windsor area. It's very hot. It's because of the Great Lakes. Big bodies of water that are very shallow, so they'll heat and cool. We are the thunderstorm capital of Canada. We get on average 29 thunderstorms a year, and Paranoid's our distiller. Brian, if you have a power outage, what happens? Yeah. It's not a good scenario to be around, and we get paranoid. But we get that, but in the wintertime, we'll probably get down to minus 20 Celsius, physically inside of our warehouses. And we've got 16 warehouses, and inside of them are 1.6 million barrels that we have inside of it, and it's the size of 132 hockey rinks. I have to say that, because I'm Canadian, eh? Stacked 6 high, so you can see here's our warehouses from the aerial view, here's our temperature, and temperatures are barrels here. Inside of the warehouses, there's no electricity. We don't even light our warehouses. We don't heat them. We have dry fire suppression systems for those engineers that are out there. We don't even fill our lines with water suppression. So we will physically get cold, and I happen to take this because we were launching Cast Strength Lot 40 in this fall. And that happened in February. The liquid inside the barrel was minus 6. It was minus 6 degrees Celsius. And I'm currently monitoring it today, or when I left it was 39 degrees Celsius when I left. I'll see how warm it'll get up. We feel that expansion and contraction of the barrel certainly will allow it to breathe, as Ian indicated before. And for us, here's our temperature influence. What happens is this: as oxygen touches ethanol, it turns it into ethyl acetate. That's a green apple character. So if you see the age part on the wood on my curve here, that's what gets created. For us, we make 10 parts per million a year. And for us, our evaporation losses are 3%. We certainly feel that wood certainly makes influences in our whiskey. And if we're to taste, I do have the 18-year-old on the table out there. It is a double distilled whiskey, so it's a light grain whiskey, aged 18 years in a used barrel. So what ended up happening is what I always like to say about that brand: it tastes like angel share. This is what happens in a barrel when oxygen touches ethanol. And it's got that high ethyl acetate. And I don't like the constellation look, but if you look at the polar histogram on this one, you can see what the dominant flavor certainly would come out of that whiskey after 18 years of aging. And because we double distill it, you're certainly not going to get those fruity notes. You don't just get a little bit on that. Right? Distilling shapes your whiskey. With that, I'm going to end on this. I get asked on Canadian whiskey what my beliefs are of this. And I've been interviewed on breakfast television, 6:45 in the morning once, and I got asked, what makes Canadian whiskey better than Scotch or Irish whiskey? And this was, oh my gosh, how do you answer? Because I know they're all beautiful spirits. We all make beautiful spirits. But one of the things I like to say is this: I believe Canadian whiskey is one of the most innovative, creative, and adaptable styles of whiskey there is. There really is only one rule or law to making Canadian whiskey. There's not 40 different micro rules. And all we have to do is be made of grain, fermented, aged, and distilled in Canada, aged in a wooden barrel less than 700 liters for a minimum of 3 years. That's it. They don't tell me I have to use a mash bill. I don't have to. They don't tell me how to distill it, what distilling methodology to use. They don't tell me the barrel type I have to use. And that makes Canadian whiskey diverse And isn't that Canada? And I think our whiskey matches our culture. It really does. With that, thank you. And certainly if you want a flavor reel, I got a stack of them somewhere. If you want to take some for your friends or whatever, you're more than welcome to. I think Dave has it on his website too if you want to download it from Scotch Whisky. Is it still up on your website?
It should be, Becky.
Okay, yes, it is.
Yes, it is. Yeah, okay. There's me in 20 years right here. Okay.
Thanks, Don. Did you get enough there? I've seen this presentation before, and you hear people's jaws hitting the floor sometimes as suddenly the science is revealed. Thank you very much for that, Don. In fact, with this, I'm just going to throw this open to the floor immediately, and then we can pick up some other questions, because Tris was squirming in his seat with excitement.
I just don't want to go first again, but
Go!
Don, that was awesome.
Thank you.
I'm a geek, and that was absolutely fascinating for me. I could probably listen to you talk about that all day, actually. I just wanted to go back to the barrel char graph with the extractives. And you kind of covered it, I think, but obviously it was pretty rapid fire, this whole thing.
Yeah, he gave me the 5 minutes thing.
But I was interested in that the 4mm char produces less extractives than the 2mm. And what was the reasoning behind that? Is it to do with the kind of extractive effect of carbon on the inside of the cask?
I think you've just completely overburned. You went to the building block and then you completely incinerated the building block to pure carbon.
Yeah.
Just nothing but pure carbon, and I think you can overburn a barrel.
You're sort of creating a barrier then at that point.
Yeah. And I don't know what the sweet spot is. I really don't. I mean, there's more research that needs to be done, obviously, and toasting. And, I think there's more research. Seasoning barrels, I think there's something to it. Sitting under the sunshine and weathering the barrel, I think that breaks barrels down as well. I mean, that's ultimately what we're trying to do here, is to create that flavor. Yeah.
Did you change some truths? I mean, did this change the way that people think about whiskey? You know, or turn some ideas on their head?
I'm not sure. It's turned my ideas.
Yeah.
I think it's turned my ideas. And if anyone thinks about re-charring a barrel, you want to know about that, you get about to here. You can't char either. You got to scrape the char. I've learned that lesson too. It gets back here, but there's certain compounds you can never get back. Those are your whiskey lactones. Furfural alcohol is another one that will never ever come back. So there are a few things that wouldn't come back either. So those who are looking to re-char barrels and repurpose barrels, but you lose on evaporation too because you thin the barrel out. Any others? Yeah.
I was just wondering, first of all, I think it's very good to hear you saying that you're a brewer, foremost.
Yeah.
Why don't you then include yeast in your last slide saying
in the 18 year?
Developing recipes? Why isn't yeast a part of it?
Yeah, that's one of my biggest struggles. I pray someday that consumers would understand that yeast makes alcohol. I think one of the benefits for a master blender, and I can maybe talk to the others in the room, I think it's key for us to get out and talk to consumers. I really think that's important, and journalists and everybody else. And the more I talk to them and you talk about yeast, it is a turnoff. It is, unfortunately, is a turnoff. I think everybody in this room would appreciate yeast for what it can do and the flavors that it can make. It is the most important flavor aspect to whiskey. 40% of its at least comes from yeast, right? Alcohol.
Brewers succeed in communicating that.
Yeah, us as whiskey producers, we struggle. There's a few brands out there I think that do, but there's very, very few. One of the coolest things I have is I got yeast strains from the original original whiskey distillers in Canada in lyophilized cultures since 1930, and I can get them to grow. I'd love someday to make whiskey from the original yeast, or from the original whiskey barons in Canada. What would their whiskeys would have tasted like with their yeast culture? I think that would be absolutely cool. But again, it's about timing. If I would have known in 1998, anyone knows the brand Law 40, 1998, we launched 100% rye whiskey, it failed miserably. We launched it again in 2012. The growth rate now is incredible. It's timing. It's about market timing.
I mean, I think in terms of that, you were talking about communication, and you would love consumers to understand more about it. A couple of questions coming off that. One about the flavour wheel itself. How much is that an aid to you as a distiller, and how much of that is actually an aid to a consumer?
How much is a need?
How much is it an aid? Sorry, I'm Scottish.
Aid? An aid, yeah.
How much of this is aimed at a consumer, and how much of that is actually just to help you?
It is aimed to help, originally it was aimed to help me. This is what it was in my mind, I suppose, when I developed it. But as we went to Whisky Fest and we put stacks of these on the table, people, they would be gone within an hour. And they'd ask, well, what is this? What is it? And I know that sometimes it's way out there, but the consumer still wants to see that. They pick out stacks of these things, and really, that's what it do. I don't know the answer to what you're at, but I mean, they just take stacks of them, and I think that knowledge, I guess the point is the consumers are more knowledge hungry than they ever been. They want to know details about your mash bill, with every detail, every intricacy, and maybe this is part of that, maybe this is part of that. And for those out there, I maybe challenge, I would love for somebody to make a Scotch wheel, because you wouldn't use rye and stuff, you use a different proportion of rain, or maybe an Irish whiskey wheel. That would be nice to see. I had a guy in the San Francisco Whiskey Fest say, I'm going to come back, see you next year, I'm going to make a tequila wheel. So all they would do is just take the grain off and put agave. So the purpose is there. I mean, the purpose you can tailor make it to whatever whiskey style that you make.
So we have a challenge laid down here, Brian.
Yeah.
Okay. You have 1 year. Okay. Also, I mean, again, so coming off that and talking about the consumers who are now really interested in detail and wanting to understand it. What do you think some of the misunderstandings about Canadian whiskey are that you're trying to redress?
The misunderstandings of Canadian whiskey, I think we absolutely make great, first and foremost, great quality whiskey. We're just different. I mean, the whiskeys I brought here today are certainly world award-winning whiskeys, and I think we can stand up to it. Us as Canadians, I think we've been too apologetic. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. And I've said it to a couple of you in the audience, when was the last time you saw a master blender from Canada? We have done a real poor job for 80 years not telling our story. And I look to my brothers and sisters in the Scotch whiskey industry who go out there and talk about it all the time. And certainly the bourbon does a fantastic job in American whiskey. The Canadians, we just don't talk about it and tell our story. I think we've been very poor storytellers. And I think that's been the downfall of Canadian whiskey, is we lost our way for a long time. And I think it's coming back, Dave. And I really believe with you, we can really see the momentum changing, certainly with the distills we're putting away today.
Maybe a slightly political question. Well, actually, it is a political question. With the possibility of warfare between Canada, or America and Canada, and also seriously the imposition of potential imposition of tariffs, is that actually an opportunity to get Canadian whiskey into the rest of the world, rather than just an over-reliance on your big neighbour?
Yeah, maybe. I think take it as an opportunity. Here's an alternative that might be in their wheelhouse. I think every nation has its own political pride, and I think Canadians, although we don't show it very often, I think it may be an opportunity where we can show our pride, and these are the good things that we certainly come out of Canada. I think it could be an opportunity, although tariffs the other way on our products, I don't know, we'll see, because the U.S. is certainly a big market for Canadian whiskey. Yeah, it is.
Yeah, sure is.
Yeah.
So it's not quite thank you, Trump.
Yeah. We'll be seeing. I mean, I think the biggest thing for Canada right now, and I'd love to hear people's opinions on it, maybe in the break, is in 2 weeks from now, marijuana is legal in Canada. And I don't know how that's going to affect our industry. I mean, I don't know if the consumer occasion for marijuana and alcohol is the same occasion, but I think Canada could certainly maybe a little bit of what the rest of the world may start to see for coming years.
I don't know why I'm looking at you, Matt, but
Marijuana's been legal in Washington State.
Yeah, we talked last night about that a little bit.
Yeah, and nothing's changed. People.
Yeah, that's my sense as well. But
People just smoke marijuana when it was legal, and now they smoke it when it is legal. And culturally, in our neighborhood where we produce it,
For us, for 9.09%, we can blend into our whiskeys 2-year-old spirit, so it has to be at least 2-year-old spirit or wine. I happen to have the oldest recipe book in Canada from Hiram Walker way back in the 1880s, and you could see, this was even before whiskey had to be aged, but you could see Hiram Walker blending in rum and prune wine into his whiskeys. So I can imagine as the whiskey categories evolved, we went through Prohibition, Canadian distillers sat down, how to define Canadian whiskey? It's got to be made of grain, forgot the age, still a Canada, blah, blah. Well, what about this, the wines or the other aged spirits that we can blend in? How do we regulate ourselves around that? So when we, as blenders, we'll blend to 100 mils, let's say. 100 milliliter cylinder, if you can visualize that. If you put 10 milliliters on top of that, that's 110. So that's how they restricted themselves. If you divide 10 into 110, that's 9.09%. So those are the types of things we can add. It's one more paint to my painter's palette. My supply management person wants to quite strangle my neck. You want to blend what in your whiskey? One of our successful brands that we launched in British Columbia 2 years ago was a brand called JP Weiser's Union 52, where we blended in 52-year-old Scotch at a 4% level into our whiskey. It was just fantastic. You had an opportunity to try it, and it was just an interesting whiskey put all together, and it just sold like that. And people embraced it, quite frankly. They certainly embraced it. And usually, for me personally, as a blender, those tend to be the more expensive ingredients. So I don't do it to every brand, but there's certain things if I want to treat that serve newness. So that allows me to be innovative. I mean, whoever thought Scotch to Canadian whiskey? How would that be? How would ours whiskeys mix? I don't know. That'd be interesting. So that gives you a little bit of latitude of what you can do. Does that answer? Yeah. Okay. It's always been there.
Great. Well, I'm quite sure there'll be plenty more questions for Don as the doors are opened and whiskies are revealed and cups of coffee and everything. But until then,
thanks, Dave.
huge thanks to Dr. Don Livermore.